The tear opened at 2:47 in the afternoon above Midtown Manhattan, and it opened without warning. It did not look like an explosion. It did not look like a portal, not in the way the Sorcerer Supreme's portals looked, with their golden geometric precision and the surgical sense of a door opening in a practiced hand. It looked like the sky had split, like something on the other side had pressed too hard against the membrane separating this universe from wherever that was, and the membrane had given way at the point of least resistance, tearing along a seam no one had known was there. The light bleeding through was the wrong color, not the orange of a sunset or the cold white of a space stone event, but something adjacent to gold, warmer, carrying a quality the atmospheric senses could not quantify because they had no category for it. On Fifth Avenue below, people stopped walking. Several of them raised their phones. A few, operating on something older than logic, took 3 steps backward without deciding to. SHIELD's deep monitoring grid, which had been cataloging anomalous energy signatures since the Battle of New York, flagged the event in the first 4 seconds, ran 23 comparison checks against every archived energy class in the database, and returned a result it almost never returned. Unknown. A figure fell through the tier. He was wearing orange and blue training clothes. No armor, no weapon, no energy shell between his body and the 600 feet of open air beneath him. He dropped straight down for 2 full seconds, and then caught himself at speed, leveling into a hover above the Midtown Canyon as naturally as someone catching their balance on a misread step, a small correction, nothing forced, and he held position with his arms loose at his sides. His eyes moved across the skyline slowly, with the patient, interested attention of someone who had just arrived somewhere new and was working out the shape of the place. He looked around. Below him, Fifth Avenue froze in the particular way New York freezes when the people on it understand that something is happening overhead and cannot yet determine whether to run. Traffic stopped. A tourist lowered her camera. A food cart vendor left 3 hot dogs on the grill because taking his eyes off the man hovering above him felt like the worst of his 2 available options. The man in the sky looked back down. His expression was not threatening. It was the expression of someone taking the measure of a new place. He reached out with what he would have called his key sense. It was a faculty as natural to him as hearing, a full-body registration of the living world, the sensation of every life force in range resolving into something distinct and readable. It fired wide and found more than he expected. The planet below was dense with life in a way he rarely encountered from a starting position. Every block radiating heat and movement in the compressed pulse of civilization running at full pitch. He sorted through it. Most of the signatures were ordinary, indistinct at distance, a continuous low hum. But others were layered through it, soldiers, several blocks north, mobilizing with the sharp, disciplined quality that registers in Chi as organized intent. Handtumans in multiple directions, signatures, a tier above the baseline, some close, some muffled by distance. To the northwest, something that read like a god, a signature carrying a density and age with no equivalent in the human register, far away and not yet looking in his direction. And further upstate, buried under what felt like years of daily containment, a rage energy of an order he had never felt from a human-sized source. It was enormous. It was being held down by the person it lived inside, with the specific, permanent effort of something that had been holding on for a very long time and understood, at some level below thought, that this state of affairs would not last. He did not know what any of it was. He was delighted. 17 stories below street level, in lower Manhattan, an analyst named Torres had been on shift for 4 hours when the secondary monitoring board lit. She called it in. Her voice stayed level in the way. Voices stay level when training holds and everything underneath says to panic. Director Fury, Station 7. Unclassified dimensional event above Midtown. Origin confirmed dimensional and not terrestrial. Energy type does not match. Space stone, Bifrost, chaos magic, gamma, PIM, particles, or any Kree Asgardian energy class in the registry. Satellite imaging shows a humanoid subject, male, hovering at approximately 500 feet above Fifth Avenue. Power output reads as, she checked the screen, error. Sir, the sensor is returning an error on power output. 23. Comparison checks, no archive match. Subject is confirmed organic. No armor, no visible technology, no identifiable power source on any spectrum in the database. He is hovering in broad daylight above Midtown, and he appears to be looking at the buildings. Another pause. Sir, he just looked at a taxicab for about 8 seconds. He looks interested. Nick Fury's voice came back even. Avengers alert. Eyes on from every asset we have. Nothing fired until I know what I'm looking at. Yes, sir. Torres looked at the readout. The sensor kept running checks in the patient way. Good instruments run checks when pointed at something they were not built to measure. 30 comparison protocols cycled through and returned the same result. Unknown. He landed on a rooftop 11 blocks from his arrival point. The concrete did not crack when he touched down. He had controlled that deliberately. Some instinct toward care in a place that did not know him yet. Street noise came up in layers. Traffic. Music from a window 3 floors below. Pigeons. One of them landed 2 feet from his right boot and studied him with the specific indifference pigeons carry for things that do not appear to be food. He crouched down and looked at it. The pigeon did not move. It had been here longer than he had and appeared to know it. He had fought opponents who could split moons, and here was a small grey bird with rust-colored eyes, looking at him like he was of neutral interest at best. He appreciated that about it. 3 seconds later, the military helicopter appeared on the northern horizon, moving at speed, turning toward his position with the deliberate arc of something that had been given a target and knew how to reach it. He stood and raised his hand in a wave. The helicopter banked toward him. It did not wave back. He lowered his hand and watched it come. Somewhere to the northwest, the god signature had shifted slightly, not moved, only adjusted its attention, the way a person in a crowded room turns their head when the energy in the room changes. The world was resolving out of noise into something specific, a place with extraordinary people in it, problems he had not been asked to care about, rules he did not know yet, a ceiling he had not found. The world had no idea, not the pilot in that helicopter, not the analyst 17 stories underground, not the distant signature that had just turned its head. No idea at all what had just landed in it. Real quick, before we go any further, who else did you want coming through that tier? Drop the character in the comments. Let's go. The spider sense fired 10 blocks out before Peter Parker saw anything. It was not the sharp spike that came with a fist at velocity or a car leaving its lane. This was different. A low, sustained pressure at the base of his skull, like a hand resting on something that could detonate but was not yet pressing. Somewhere ahead, something had landed. The danger was not in what it was doing. The danger was in what it could. He swung toward Midtown in 3 arcs and caught the SHILD helicopter before he caught the rooftop. It had been circling the same spot for 6 minutes, which meant it had found something and had no idea what to do with it. From 2 blocks out, he saw the subject on the concrete. A man in orange and blue, arms loose at his sides, looking at the helicopter with the relaxed, open curiosity of someone watching a bird float past. Peter landed on a water tower across the gap. He did not swing closer. The figure on the roof had not reacted to his arrival. That was unusual. Most people in any condition, enhanced, hostile, frightened, neutral, registered a spider-suited figure dropping out of a web line at speed. This one's eyes stayed on the helicopter. Peter's spider sense held its low, steady note. Not danger, potential, held in check. Then the man turned and looked directly at him. No alarm, no shift in posture. A calm, measuring look that the spider sense catalogued as. Peter swung down and landed 20 meters across the roof. "Hey!" He raised one hand. "You're not one of ours, are you?" The man tilted his head. He had been reading Peter the same way Peter had been reading him. Stance, build, the web shooters, the angle of a landing that only went on walls. His expression moved from open curiosity to something more concentrated. "You strong?" It was not quite a question. "I am, moderately." Peter touched the back of his wrist. "Hey, Tony, reading anything off this guy?" Tony Stark's voice came through the suit speaker, clipped and already moving. "Scanning." The man on the roof was watching Peter, now with a fighter's specific patience, measuring him the way an experienced combatant measures an unfamiliar opponent, starting with the stance, working inward. Peter had met 2 versions of this look in his life, the kind that was deciding how hard to hit him, and the kind that was deciding how interesting the fight would be. This was the second kind. "What's your name?" Peter tried. "Goku, Goku." He said it back. "Just Goku, no team, no title, no, are you here with anyone?" "No." Goku looked back out at the skyline, that same wide, unhurried attention. Different universe. Peter stared at him. "I'm sorry, different what?" Tony's voice cut back through. "Parker, I'm getting nothing off this guy. Actual nothing. No gamma, no tech signature, nothing Asgardian, no baseline radiation, no power source I can classify. His molecular structure reads as entirely normal. Fine. Whatever fine means for someone, I cannot explain." "What does his power source read as?" Peter said. A pause longer than it should have been. Tony Stark did not pause on things he knew. Peter had learned to read the length of the gaps. "Error." Tony's voice had gone flat. "The sensor is returning error on power source. Same as the grid, same as Station 7. I am looking at a man who reads as error on 17 simultaneous protocols, and I do not enjoy the experience." Goku was watching Peter with mild interest. "You're talking to someone, a few summons. You're very hard to read." "I don't know what that means." He did not look troubled by this. He looked like someone who had been told his handwriting was illegible and found this slightly interesting. The helicopter had been maintaining altitude. Now it dropped lower and the side door slid open. A containment specialist, kneeling in the doorway, fired a tranquilizer round at the man on the roof. Goku did not dodge. He had no reason to. The dart struck his forearm and bounced, hit the concrete, rolled 3 inches and stopped. He looked at it, on the ground. Then at the helicopter. Then at Peter. Peter was already stepping into the sight line, both hands up. "Okay." Nobody do that again. The door closed. The helicopter banked. Goku picked up the dart. The needle had bent at a right angle where it hit his arm. He turned it over in his fingers, then set it down on the nearest parapet, with the care of returning something borrowed that he had no particular use for. "That is supposed to do something," he said. "Usually, yeah." Interesting. A pause short, the focused internal quiet of a fighter processing new information. This world. Yeah, Peter said. That's kind of how everyone feels about it. The Situation Room at the Triskelion had gone quiet in the way Fury's rooms went quiet, when people understood the parameters had changed and were waiting for him to define the new ones. He watched the rooftop feed. Black Widow stood at his left, reading the same footage with the systematic attention she applied to everything. Around them, analysts worked requests without being asked. The available read was not complicated. Male humanoid, unknown species, no stated origin, no weapons, no hostile action initiated. He had absorbed a military-grade tranquilizer with his forearm, and his first instinct had been to look for where it fell, so he could set it down carefully. He was currently discussing this world with Spider-Man, in the tone of a tourist who has just been told. An interesting local fact, he had not once looked like he was planning anything. Options, Fury said. Containment is off the table. Romanoff did not qualify this. Nothing in our archive reads on him. No power type, no ceiling we can assess. Extended observation is option 2 and 3. We find out what he actually is before we make any decision that forecloses the ones we haven't made yet. Fury watched the feed. The man in orange had set the bent dart on the parapet and was looking back at the skyline with the same open, patient interest he had arrived with. All 3, Fury said simultaneously. On the rooftop, Goku watched the helicopter bank north and reached his key sense further out. The god signature to the northwest had shifted, not approaching, not retreating, but its direction had changed. Whatever carried that signature had noticed something new in the city and was paying attention to it now. Still far, still not moving. The rage energy upstate held steady, enormous, contained, patient in the way something is patient when patience is not a choice it has made, but a state it is being held in from the outside. And then, at the very edge of what his sense could reach, past the planet, past the distance where signatures faded into background noise, something else. Cold, deliberate, not on the planet, not in the solar system, much further out than that, and still. It was not the largest signature he had felt in this universe, it was the most controlled. Every unit of it was in reserve. He recognized it the way a fighter recognized another fighter, standing still in a crowd. Not by what they were doing, but by the quality of how they held themselves. He held that impression for a moment. Then the rooftop pulled him back. Spider-Man was watching him from a few meters away with an expression caught somewhere between professional concern and helpless curiosity. There were interesting people here. Far more than he had expected, it turned out. The alert went to 6 assets simultaneously. Iron Man, Mark L, airborne from the Stark pad, vector locked to Midtown Manhattan. Additional powered armor units on standby at perimeter altitude. Captain America, ground team lead, Quinjet out of the helicarrier bay. Black Widow, tactical intelligence support, comms primary, 3SHIELD, field units with neutralization equipment, restraint systems, and 2 EMP drones. Standard deployment configuration for an unclassified enhanced combatant. Nick Fury's directive, delivered flat over open comms. Do not harm him. Do not let him harm anyone. Contain. The configuration was, as it turned out, not quite the right one. On the street in Midtown, the man in orange training clothes had been standing in the same spot for 11 minutes, watching the building across from him with the deliberate, unhurried attention of someone passing an unfamiliar architectural style. The SHIELD perimeter established itself around him, 4 units, 1 at each compass point, the EMP drones holding at altitude. He did not run. He did not posture. He watched the drones with genuine curiosity. When he turned around and found Iron Man floating 30 meters overhead, his expression did not change much. He tilted his head. Goku reached out with his key sense. 12 signatures around him, disciplined and organized. The man in the red and gold armor, technologically amplified, no innate power, confidence in his systems running at a register, Goku read as high and genuine. The woman in the dark tactical suit at his 4 o'clock, peak human, coiled, patient. She had not looked directly at Goku once since the perimeter closed. She had been watching the exits and the drone feed and the soldier with the shield in that order, and she was doing it with the focused attention of someone for whom the observable facts were only the first layer. This one was reading him the way he was reading them. There was a heavy hitter to the south, approaching on foot, the one with the shield. A key signature that the others did not quite have, stronger than the physical metrics alone suggested. Something in the quality of the intent. He filed that one for later. Captain America stepped to the front of the perimeter. He did not raise the shield to throw. He held it at his side. "We're not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was level. "We need you to come with us." Goku smiled. "Okay, I'll try not to break anything." 3 seconds later, the restraint systems had all been neutralized. The first pair of energy nets, military grade and rated for enhanced targets at 3 metric tons, lay on the street in a shape that suggested they had been folded rather than destroyed. The EMP drones had been redirected, both of them now circling 40 meters in the wrong direction, not damaged, just pointed somewhere else. Goku was hovering 4 feet above the asphalt. His feet were not touching the ground. He had not gone Super Saiyan. He had not used a named technique. He had just moved. "Sorry," he said. They were grabbing. Iron Man descended to 12 meters. His HUD was running 17 protocols simultaneously, cross-referencing Goku's output against every energy classification in the armor's database: Gamma, Asgardian, Magical Kree, Technological, Biological Enhanced. The suit had been designed to read anything from a mutant X-gene spike to a space stone signature. It returned the same result it had returned from the monitoring grid and from Spider-Man's suit sensor and from Station 7 error. "Furry," Tony said over encrypted comms. "I still don't have a power source. I have a man standing in front of me who has neutralized military containment equipment, and my armor is telling me he is doing it with nothing. With nothing." "What about his ceiling?" Fury said. A pause. "Also error. There's no ceiling on the reading, no top end. Either the sensor is broken or there isn't one." He fired the repulsors at half output, mostly to see what happened. The beams hit Goku in the chest. He turned to face them. His expression shifted from cheerful to mildly interested. "Huh," he said. "That tingles." Tony fired at full output. Full output was not, in operational terms, a thing he did in a populated area. The beams hit and spread across Goku's body, and didn't stop him, and didn't move him, and didn't do anything he could measure as damage. The man blinked, looked down at his chest, looked back up. "Did you turn it up?" he said. "Or is that all it does?" "Fury," Tony said, "I don't know what this person is, and that is not a thing I say lightly." Captain America had not stopped moving. While Iron Man ran protocols, Steve Rogers had already cleared the perimeter. Shield held across his chest, moving at the disciplined and patient sprint of a man who had spent 80 years learning that the answer to something he couldn't shoot. He threw the shield in a trick bounce pattern, off the concrete at an angle, rebounding off the SHIED. Barricade behind Goku, coming in from behind, while Steve followed it from the front. Goku tracked it with his Kai sense. Took the vibranium disc on 2 fingers, redirected it gently back into Steve's grip. Did not move his feet. Steve caught it without breaking stride and came in hand to hand, and it was good. It was genuinely, technically skillful at a level that registered in Goku's Ki-sense reading as something distinct, a body pushed as close to its operational limit as it could reach without any artificial enhancement, every technique placed, nothing wasted. The super soldier serum had not added anything that did not belong there. It had only made what was already present run more completely. Goku blocked each contact point, 2 fingers for the strikes he could read in advance, an open palm for the ones that required more attention. He didn't step back. "You're not going to stop," he said. "No," Steve said. Goku let the next shield strike absorb into his palm and fall still. He said it the way another fighter would say it. Not mockingly. With the specific, quiet pleasure of recognizing something real. Steve Rogers looked at him across a meter of open space. His jaw was set. He was not afraid. He was running the calculation he ran when the math was bad. What do I have left? What can I do? Where is the next honest step? Goku read this across his face and did not interrupt it. He wanted to see where it went. In the command center on the helicarrier, Nick Fury watched the feed. 16 assets engaged. 3 Avengers in active contact. 1 unmanned aerial support drone still operational at altitude and a helicarrier gun battery with a targeting solution authorized on his word. None of them had drawn blood. The subject was standing in the middle of all of it with the pleasant, unhurried interest of something watching a demonstration it found charming. Fury took a breath. It was not a fight. He understood that now it was the subject making a determination, methodically and without any apparent urgency, about what this world had available to send at him. He took his hand off the gun battery authorization switch. There was no point. He had spent 30 years learning the difference between a problem that needed more firepower and a problem that needed more information. This was the second kind. He was beginning to think it had always been the second kind. And Goku was the one doing the assessing. The Bifrost came first. Not the bridge itself, only the column. A tight, brilliant shaft of light that struck the intersection of 6th Avenue and 42nd Street with enough force to crack the asphalt in a 3-meter ring. The man who stepped out of it was tall, armored, carrying an axe with a wooden handle in his right hand, and a specific quality in his bearing that Goku's Ki sense read immediately. Divine, ancient. Real in a way, the soldiers and the armored man had not been real. Thor looked at the figure in orange, hovering above the intersection. One look. Then, "You are not of the 9 realms." His Kai sense had gone very still, the way it went still when the reading was worth sitting with. This signature carried something he recognized from the tournaments, not its specifics, but its category. A being that had existed long enough that power had become structural. Not a thing this person had. A thing this person was. "No," Goku said. "Different universe," he paused. "You strong." Thor's eyes narrowed. "Not offense." Then the lightning came. Not as a threat. As an answer, the Thunder God did not negotiate the way the humans had tried to negotiate. He spoke in the same language Goku had been speaking since the moment he arrived. Demonstration. The bolt hit Goku full in the chest, and the air turned white, and every camera on the block shorted, and the street cracked from the shockwave. When the light cleared, Goku's hair was gold, his eyes were teal. The air pressure around him had shifted in a new register, like a key changing, The golden aura settled around him and did not flicker. "Super Saiyan," he said mostly to himself. "You're the first person here who made me need that." Thor looked at the aura, looked at Goku's face. Something in his expression moved. He threw Stormbreaker, not as a finisher, as a test. The axe crossed the gap in a fraction of a second. Goku caught it with his right hand, the haft settling into his palm. Stormbreaker carried no worthiness lock. It required only sufficient strength to hold. He turned it over, with the same evaluating attention he gave everything, checking the balance and the weight distribution. Then he handed it back. "Good weapon," he said. The fight that followed took 3 city blocks. Thor at full Asgardian output, electricity sheathing his fists and channeling through the axe in sweeping arcs. Goku at SSJ, moving at a speed that left after-image-shaped impressions in the smoke. Neither of them was holding back. Both of them were reading. The God of Thunder hit hard enough that the impacts registered on seismic sensors as far as New Jersey. Goku hit back with enough force that a parking structure lost its 3rd floor. The exchange was real, the first genuinely even trade he had found in this universe. His key sense tracked Thor's output and found it consistent and old and not limited by fatigue in any normal way. This was not a man running on chemistry. This was a god, and the word was accurate. 3 minutes in, the sky split again. A streak from the upper atmosphere, white gold and too bright to look at directly. Captain Marvel hit the intersection at full photonic output, and the blast radius was half a block wide, and the cameras on the adjacent street went blind from the wash. She had been briefed. She did not ask questions. A binary state pulse left her hands, concentrated, aimed at the man in the golden aura. Goku took it. The energy spread across his key field and dispersed, the raw photonic charge diffusing through him the way a wave disperses across a seawall. He stood, looked at her. Something in his expression moved from working to genuinely interested. Then he cupped his hands at his side. The Kamehameha crossed the gap in a blue beam, wide enough to take up the full lane of a 4-lane road. Carol threw both hands up and absorbed it, the energy flooding into her and redirecting upward in a column that punched through low cloud cover and left a visible gap that took 4 seconds to close. The cloud above the intersection glowed. Goku pushed to SSJ-2. The electrical discharge came without ceremony, thin blue arcs crackling across his shoulders, and through his hair the aura sharpening. Captain Marvel matched it with binary. The two of them held position above 42nd Street, neither moving, the energy between them visible from the New Jersey Turnpike as a light that looked like a second sun pressing against the first. The shockwave from that exchange was not local. In a log cabin far upstate, a man who had spent years engineering a specific and fragile peace with the thing that lived in him felt the distant pressure of it and understood, at a level below thought, that something was fighting on his planet, something that was not stopping. Bruce Banner did not stay calm. By the time the Green arrived in Midtown, Goku was at SSJ-2, and Thor had re-entered the fight from the north, Stormbreaker generating a focused lightning arc that pushed the exchange into 3 dimensions. The Hulk's entry was not subtle. A highway overpass 3 blocks east, splintered under an enormous hand, and then the shape that went with the hand was crossing the gap at a sprint, and the seismic impact, when it hit the street, registered differently from everything else because this was not enhanced human speed. This was pure, unregulated mass, moving as fast as rage could push it, and the rage was still building. The Hulk hit Goku from the side, and they went through a wall, and then another wall, and then out the far side of the building into the street beyond. Goku in front, the Hulk driving the momentum, and the impact when they hit the building across that street left an impression in the brick 6 inches deep. Goku climbed out of it. His lip was bleeding. He had not bled in Chapter 3, or in the exchange with the Thunder God, or in the binary form standoff. He was bleeding now, his hair extended. Not the sleek gold of SSJ, or the sharp-edged gold of SSJ2. SSJ3 was its own register, hair falling past his shoulders, the key cost registering immediately as enormous. He had never been able to hold this form for long, but the Hulk's output was still climbing with each exchange, the rage feeding more strength into every subsequent strike, and the ceiling he had been working from for the last 30 seconds was no longer sufficient. They went several more rounds at this level, Thor and Captain Marvel pressing from range, managing the geometry to keep civilians clear of any exit vector. Goku managing the green in close, blocking what his Kai sense could read early and absorbing what it couldn't, each impact felt and real, and the Kai cost compounding on a clock he could feel in his bones. The Hulk hit him hard enough that he left the ground. He came down 2 blocks east, got up, walked back. He was grinning. Nick Fury made a decision. Pull everyone back now. The count afterward, 4 city blocks requiring structural assessment, 2 craters at the intersection of 6th and 42nd, a highway overpass that would not carry traffic again this year, 0 civilian casualties. The visitor had been active in the middle of it, and every person in the engagement zone had been working around a moving obstacle that seemed to know exactly where they were and where they could not afford to be. The collateral was concrete and steel, all of it. Goku dropped SSJ3 as the Avengers pulled back, base form again, breathing normally, standing in the middle of 4 blocks of wreckage, with no visible indication that the last 12 minutes had cost him anything except 1 split lip. Thor landed near him. He was breathing hard. "Who trained you?" he said. Goku thought about it, honestly. Lots of people. They were all good fights. The Asgardian looked at him for a long moment. He had fought gods and giants and forces that predated civilization and the written history of a dozen worlds. He had never fought something that walked out of a 3-front exchange at SSJ3 and put its hands in its pockets and looked ready to discuss the experience. His assessment of the man in orange had changed. What it changed to had no clean word in any of the 9 realms. He filed it away and looked at the wreckage and said nothing else, because nothing else was necessary, and because some reads required silence to settle properly. Doctor Strange arrived at the battle's aftermath the way he arrived at most things, without hurry and without announcing his approach until he was already where he intended to be. He had been watching the feed from the sanctum for 11 minutes. He had seen Thor's lightning find the golden aura. He had seen the Kamehameha exchange, and the SSJ2 standoff, and the Hulk's entry, and the 3-building trajectory, and the grin at the end of it. He had watched the visitor absorb full output from 3 Tier 4 combatants and come out of it at base form with his hands in his pockets, and Strange had learned years ago that the most dangerous things were not the things that hurt you. They were the things you could not read. "Everyone stand down," he said. "I'd like to talk." The remaining Avengers looked at him. He walked toward Goku with the deliberate calm of someone who had negotiated with beings that could end cities and who knew that posture was its own language. Goku's Kai sense registered him immediately. This signature was different from Thor's divinity, different from the amplified tech quality of the armor. Dense, layered. The energy that moved through this person had been studied and shaped rather than lived in. "You're the one who knows things," Goku said. Strange raised an eyebrow. "I've been told that." "Yes," His read of Goku's energy at close range confirmed everything the sensors had already failed to confirm. Not a magical signature, not gamma or a mutant expression or any divine energy class he knew. The Vishanti had entries for most things that could reasonably be called power. This had no entry. He wanted very much to know what it was. "I'd like to run some diagnostics," Strange said. "Non-invasive, you won't feel anything." "Okay," Goku said. The sling ring opened. Strange had used a dimensional pocket construct in a containment context before, and it was distinct from the time loop he had once sealed around Dormammu, which had required the time stone and exploited a specific temporal vulnerability. This was simpler and more direct. Fold the local geometry around the target into a closed pocket, sever access to normal space, hold it. Standard containment. He had no reason to think it would fail. The pocket closed around Goku. For approximately 2 seconds, Strange watched the diagnostic begin to run. Then the pocket was empty. He turned around. Goku was standing 10 meters behind him. He had not teleported in any way that left a visual trace. He was simply there, in a position he had not occupied a moment before, looking at Strange with an expression that combined curiosity with something that might have been apology. Strange turned back slowly. "You teleported through a closed dimensional construct." "I just follow the Kai," Goku said. "Yours was easy to find. You have a very distinct signature. I was inside the pocket's geometry. The geometry was closed." The key was still outside it. He paused, thinking about how to say it. If someone is in the other room and you can hear their voice, you can still go to where the sound is coming from. The walls don't change that part. Strange was quiet for a moment. The cloak shifted. "What is key?" he said. Goku paused. The way someone paused when asked to explain color to a person who had never seen. Life energy, battle power, everything alive runs on it. A strong enough fighter can feel it in other people, track it, move toward it, use it. He looked at Strange with the same evaluating attention. "You use something different." "The mystic arts," Strange said. "The study and application of dimensional energies and the laws that govern realities across multiple planes. Is that the same as what I do?" "No," Strange said. "It is not." He ran every diagnostic available to him. Not magical in any signature the Vishanti recorded. Not a gamma death force expression, not a mutant X-gene elevation, not any technology-powered enhancement he could classify. Not divine in any sense the 9 realms or any named pantheon he had encountered recognized. The Book of the Vishanti contained entries for power forms that predated the current multiverse. He searched it 3 times. His report to Fury was precise. "This person's power has no taxonomy in this universe. He is not operating on any engine we have a name for. His teleportation bypasses spatial containment because it navigates by life energy rather than geometry. I cannot build a trap that does not contain a source of life energy for him to lock onto, which means I cannot contain something I cannot classify." A pause on Fury's end. "What's your recommendation? Talk to him," Strange said. "I have been. It is informative." Charles Xavier had been watching through Cerebro since the afternoon. The tear opened in the sky above Midtown. Not continuously. Consistently. He had built a read on the visitor's brainwave pattern in the first hour. Not a human pattern. Not any mutant or enhanced variant, but alive in all the ways Cerebro measured. He had noted warmth, he had noted curiosity. He had not noted anything that read as malice, strategic calculation, or the specific quality of intention he had learned to recognize in people who planned to use power as a governing instrument. He asked Fury for permission to make direct telepathic contact. Fury considered it for 6 seconds, which for Fury was a substantial deliberation. "Do it," Fury said. Xavier reached into Goku's mind, expecting one of several things: alien aggression, a conquering architecture, the hardened interior of someone for whom violence had been the primary language so long it had become the only one. He had read warlords. He had read men and women who believed the shape of the world was theirs to decide. He knew what that interior looked like. What he found instead was this: warmth that was simple and complete and not performed. An uncomplicated joy in the act of fighting that carried no malice, the way a musician's joy in playing carried no malice even when the music was loud. A catalogue of every opponent the man had ever faced, each one stored with something that was not quite love, but was the closest relative love had in a mind organized around contest. Full, genuine respect extended to its outermost reach. And, behind all of it, running as the constant below every surface thought, a drive so fundamental and so unadorned that Xavier could not attach an ideology to it. The next ceiling. The next thing his body had not yet been asked to do. No ambition, no program, no will to arrange the world in any particular shape. A complete absence of the weight of consequence. So Xavier withdrew. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the cerebro chamber. Then he contacted Fury privately. He is not a villain. He is not a hero in any sense this world has a framework for. He is a warrior. And the most dangerous thing I have ever read in a mind is not a will to destroy. It is an utter absence of the will to be responsible for what he can do. Fury was quiet. He does not experience power as a weight, Xavier continued. He experiences it as a direction. He has the capacity to reshape the balance of this planet, and he thinks of it as a Tuesday he is looking forward to. Goku was sitting in what had been a park, watching a squirrel navigate a knocked-over tree with impressive focus, when Strange walked back over. "The man in the chair," Goku said. "He was in my head for a while. Yes, can I go in his?" Strange considered this with the seriousness it deserved. That's not how it works. Too bad. Goku watched the squirrel commit to a decision about the tree and follow through on it. Would have been interesting to see what someone who uses their mind as a weapon thinks about. Strange said nothing. He returned to Kathmandu that evening. The windows of the monastery rattled in their frames for no observable reason while he sat down with his tea, a low harmonic in the old glass that came and went in a few seconds and left nothing behind. He stared at the tea for a long time. He had read the Vishanti records from the beginning of the current multiverse through to its present state. He had no entry for what he had seen today. He had no entry for what he felt reasonably certain, had just noticed him thinking about it. He did not look for an answer. He was not sure he wanted one. Eric Lenscher had spent enough years reading the shape of power to recognize it when it appeared in a new form. What he had seen since the morning the sky tore open above Midtown told him several things. The being who had come through it was not a mutant. Cerebro had confirmed that, and Eric had confirmed it again, through his own assessment, watching the fight feeds with the Brotherhood's analysts and their independent instruments. The being carried no magnetic signature, no gamma expression, no Asgardian classification. He operated on something none of their instruments could name, but the effect was legible. The human institutions had scrambled. One enters H, and I and A, and D, the Avengers, the Sorcerer Supreme, the telepath in Westchester. All of them had moved, and none of them had contained the problem, and the problem was currently sitting in what remained of a park in Midtown, watching the city reconstruct itself around the damage it had caused. Eric had watched powerful things arrive in this world before. The lesson was always the same. Those who do not choose sides have a side chosen for them. He was not going to let the humans do the choosing. He arrived the way he always arrived, with the weight of conviction at his back and the city's metal bending slightly toward his field, a barely perceptible lean, the steel rebar in the apartment buildings, and the iron content in the sidewalk, and the frames of parked cars shifting a fraction in his direction as he walked. He wore his familiar armor and his helmet. He did not hide what he was. The people around the park gave way. They always did, and not purely because of the field. There was something in the way he moved that had always cleared space, long before any power was involved. 40 years of being correct about how the world worked did something to a person's posture. His key sense registered the signature before he saw the face. This one's power was environmental, structural, absolute in its domain, not a combat signature in the direct sense. A control signature. Different category. "You're different from the others," Goku said. "Yes," Eric said. "I am." He made his case with the economy of someone who had made it many times and knew which arguments held. The humans would fear Goku. They already did. Fear had only one trajectory, and it moved toward control. The Brotherhood existed because some beings had learned, at considerable personal cost, that alignment with the powerful was not a luxury, but an honest reading of how things actually worked. Power that stood alone invited management. Power that aligned could not be easily managed. "You belong with those who don't need their permission," Eric said. "You already know this, or you wouldn't have come through that tier." Then he said, "I don't really think about it like that." Eric looked at him, not frustrated, recalibrating. He raised his hand. The metal came up. Every iron object within a half-mile radius lifted, drain covers and structural supports and scaffolding, and the frames of parked bicycles and the content of a hardware store 3 blocks north. They rose in perfect suspension, arranged in the slow orbit of things that understood they were being held. He held the arrangement for 3 full seconds, long enough for the afternoon light to shift through it, the city's steel suspended in a geometry that was also a sentence and also an argument, and also in some register below language. This is what dominion looks like. This is what it means to have moved past permission. Goku watched it. Then he raised one hand and fired a key blast, the size of a tennis ball at the nearest suspended drain cover. The blast passed directly through the magnetic field, not deflected, not absorbed. Through the field and through the drain cover's orbit and into the drain cover itself, which fell, and the rest of the suspended metal wobbled in the disruption of its arrangement. Ki was not metallic. It was not electromagnetic. It did not exist in any category his power operated on. The field had not noticed it. The suspended objects came down one by one as his concentration fractured against the reality of something that his power could not find a surface on. "It doesn't work on me," Goku said, not unkindly. "Sorry." Eric was quiet for a moment. Something in his posture shifted, a small adjustment, the kind that came when a long-held certainty had to move over to make room for a new fact. "You believe fighting is enough," he said, "that strength speaks for itself. That is a child's answer." "I don't fight to prove anything," Goku said. "I fight because it makes me better, and because sometimes the only honest conversation 2 people can have is with their hands. And when those hands are done, what then? The humans rebuild their cages. The weak take back what the strong won. The story repeats. Then the strong should keep getting stronger, not to cage anyone, just because that's the only honest thing to do. He paused. Getting stronger to cage someone isn't really getting stronger. It's just getting a bigger cage. Eric did not have an answer for that. He stood in the specific silence of a man whose entire life had been organized around a thesis and who had just been handed information that the thesis did not account for, not refuted, not defeated by a counter-argument, simply unaccounted for, which was, in its way, worse. He was built to refute positions made from strength and ideology, the logic of supremacy and survival, and the weight of history. He was not built to refute a man with no ideology and no apparent interest in acquiring one. The voice came from across the park, not audible in any external sense, present directly in both their minds. Calm, precise, and carrying the weight of someone who had read the interior of this particular question and was not surprised by what he found there. It was Xavier, not in person. The astral form was pale and thin in the afternoon light, visible only at the edges where it caught the shadow of the trees behind it. "He isn't what you think he is, Eric." Xavier's voice carried the specific quality of a man delivering a verdict he had already reached and was not glad about. "He isn't a symbol. He's a person with no politics, no allegiances, and no interest in our argument." "A being with that kind of power and no politics," Eric said, "is the most dangerous kind, perhaps." Xavier turned to Goku. "They're both afraid of you." Goku looked genuinely puzzled. "Everyone keeps saying that I don't understand it." "I know," Xavier said. "That's exactly the problem." He said it without reproach. As a fact about the way the world worked, and the way Goku did not, a gap as structural as the one between electromagnetic force and ki, real in both directions, bridged by neither. He had come here to make an offer, or to assess an obstacle. He had found neither. He had found a person who had absorbed the most honest demonstration of his life's work, and looked at it with mild curiosity, not because he was unimpressed, but because the framework in which the demonstration was supposed to carry meanings simply did not exist in him. That was going to take time to work on. Eric could feel it already. He left without another word. The metal in the street settled back into its grooves as his field relaxed with the distance. The drain covers returned to their places. The scaffolding stopped trembling. The rebar in the apartment buildings realigned. None of it had registered to Goku as anything other than interesting. Not a threat, not a declaration, just metal, arranged by the conviction that arrangements were arguments, and then returned to the ground when the argument found no one listening. Steve Rogers had thought about what to say for 3 days, not because he was uncertain. He was almost never uncertain about what he believed was right. He was uncertain about how to say it to someone who appeared to have no machinery for receiving it. The man who had folded military restraint nets and shrugged off full-output repulsors and traded strikes with 3 Tier 4 combatants, and stood in the wreckage of 4 city blocks with his hands in his pockets. Steve asked for one-on-one, no weapons, no SHELD. Backup, Fury said nothing for 4 seconds, and then said, "Fine." They found a stretch of park that was still standing. Goku was sitting cross-legged on the grass. He stood when Steve arrived, which was, for reasons Steve couldn't fully articulate, the detail that stayed with him longest afterward. "I've been wanting to talk," Steve said. "I know." Goku's key sense registered things before they were spoken. "You've been thinking about it since the first day." "Yes." Steve looked at him directly. He always looked at things directly. "Where I come from, having power like yours means you carry it. Every person you could save and didn't is on you. Every fight you could have stopped and didn't. Every building that comes down while you're playing around." Goku was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you think I was doing? Playing around? What would you call it? Learning. He said it plainly, like the word was complete on its own. Like everything I know about fighting, about getting stronger, I learned from a fight. You fight something that scares you. You almost die. You get better. That's not playing. That's the only honest way to grow. You could have ended that entire first engagement without going to a fraction of your power. You didn't. People got hurt. Nobody died. That's not the bar. In my world it is. Something quieter and harder than anger. The expression of a man who had heard an honest answer and did not like what it meant. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the exact distance between two men who were each correct within their own cosmology and who had no bridge between them. Steve's code was built on a single load-bearing principle. Power was a debt. The powerful protected the powerless because they could, and that obligation was not optional and not contingent, and not the kind of thing you reasoned your way out of by pointing at what hadn't happened. Goku's code said something that was not quite the opposite, but might as well have been for all the distance it created. Power was a direction. You pointed it at the next ceiling and broke through, and the breaking was the point, not the debt. The ascent. Steve had been a soldier for a long time. He knew what it looked like when two people wanted compatible things and reached for them from incompatible directions. Knowing that did not resolve it, it only named it. I understand what you're saying, Goku said, but no but. He looked at Steve steadily. I don't think you're wrong. I think we're talking about different things. Power, Steve said. Power is the same word, Goku said. It's not the same thing. Steve Rogers had no answer for that. Some arguments did not resolve. They established the exact shape of the space between people and left it there, which was its own kind of information. Fury authorized Wanda Maximoff at 0900 the following morning. The brief attempt containment, not to harm, only to contain. Wanda had read the full file. She understood what she was being asked to work with, which was to say, she understood that the Sorcerer Supreme had been unable to classify the power. The telepath had found nothing useful to grip in the mind, and the combined output of Thor and Captain Marvel and the Hulk had produced a split lip and a grin. She was not unaware of what that meant for her odds. She was also Wanda Maximoff, and her power operated on a register that did not have much to do with odds. She wrapped the probability field around Goku from 30 meters. Hex fields were not physical forces. They did not push or bind. They rewrote the statistical likelihood of every direction, made movement through normal space improbable in targeted ways, bent Ki-in on itself so that it diffused and scattered rather than concentrating. The probability architecture was sound. She felt it settle into place and hold. It worked for 12 seconds. What she felt in those 12 seconds was the containment doing exactly what it was supposed to do, the field stable, the probability weighting intact. And from inside it, a pressure that had no physical description. Density. The key field was so absolute in its concentration that it was generating its own statistical weight, pushing back against the probability from inside it, the way a river's main current keeps moving even when its tributaries have been redirected one at a time. You could bend around it. You could not stop it. The distinction mattered. His hair went red, not gold, red, and the frame of his body shifted with it, leaner, the muscular tension redistributing into something that carried a different quality than the SSJ forms, something that registered as older, cleaner, running on a separate engine entirely. God Ki was a wholly separate energy spectrum, inaccessible to standard power classifications, because it did not operate within the same physical laws those classifications were built to measure. He stepped free. Wanda looked at her hands. "Chaos magic didn't break," she said. She said it the way you said something that needed to be spoken aloud, to be fully accepted. He didn't break it, he just outweighed it. She was pale. I've never had that happen. The team watching from the perimeter had no framework for this either. 12 seconds of hold from Wanda Maximoff was not a failure by any standard anyone there measured against. The standard in question was that nothing else had worked for even 1 second. 12 was a data point that would be studied for a long time. It was also the first honest ceiling this situation had produced. The first time something had worked at all, and the first time they had seen exactly where the working stopped. The Triskelion alert came 40 minutes later, not an incursion signature, a position reading. The Deep Space Array, calibrated to detect Kree or Skrull incursion signatures at long range, was returning an anomalous reading. Not an incursion, a presence. Something at extreme distance, stationary, positioned to observe rather than approach, and in that position long enough that its stillness was the most significant thing about it. Fury reviewed the data. 30 years of threat files. This pattern was not in the active threat index. Black Widow had been cross-referencing the signal characteristics in her head since the alert came through. She had read certain files years ago and had hoped the occasion to use them would not come up. "It's Thanos," she said. "He's been watching since the anomaly." The room went quiet. Not the quiet of a room that had run out of things to say, the quiet of a room where everyone had arrived at the same calculations simultaneously, and none of them wanted to be the one who said it out loud, that there were now 2 problems on the board, and they were no longer certain which one was larger. For now, neither had moved. That was not the same as comfort, but it was, for now, what they had. Thanos stepped off his ship the way he did everything, without announcement, without theater, without any accommodation for what observers might make of it. The ship was in geosynchronous orbit above the Atlantic, close enough that his enhanced vision could resolve the cities on the eastern seaboard as individual patterns of light. In that time, he had observed the arrival of the unknown variable, the institutional scramble, the failed containment operations, the philosophical exchanges that his long-range instrumentation had partially captured as energy signatures, and the outcome of the chaos magic attempt, which he found interesting in the way that all genuinely new data was interesting. The variable had outweighed chaos magic. He had filed that. He left the gauntlet on the ship. This was deliberate. He wanted a clean assessment, the variable as it was, not as it responded to the stones. Information gathered under duress was compromised information. He stepped off the hull and descended through the outer atmosphere, powered by Titanian physiology and the accumulated consequence of a life spent in combat. In that order, the planet came up beneath him. Below him, Goku felt it the moment Thanos entered the atmosphere. He had been talking with Steve Rogers and Spider-Man in the park, or rather they had been talking, and he had been listening in the way he listened when his key sense was doing more work than his ears. The conversation was about whether he was going to stay in New York or find a different part of the planet to be based in, and he had been about to say that the city was interesting, and he was not ready to leave it when the signature entered his range. He went still. It was the same presence he had noted days earlier, the same cold measuring quality he had filed at the edge of his sense when he first reached for the city's perimeter, not cold in the hostile sense. Cold in the sense that every unit of power in that signature was accounted for, controlled, in reserve. The most deliberate Kai he had ever felt, enormous and patient, and now for the first time in the atmosphere, descending. "I need to go," he said. Steve looked at him. "Where?" "Up." He tilted his head toward the sky. I felt someone, a real someone. He locked onto the signature. It was the easiest lock he had found in this universe, because the signature was so dense and so deliberate that it carried no static at all. He used instant transmission. He was gone before either of them finished processing the sentence. 30 meters of orbital space separated them when Goku arrived. Thanos turned from his descent to face the new arrival with the unhurried quality of someone who had known for several seconds that this was coming and had used the interval to finish a thought. He looked at the figure in orange with the attention of a chess player encountering an unfamiliar opening, genuinely assessing, not alarmed, reading the position before deciding what it required. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The planet below hung at the edge of the horizon, the curve of the atmosphere separating the dark of space from the thin blue line that meant breathable air. The sun was at an angle that lit both of them from the same side, and the Atlantic below caught the light in a way that made the world look, briefly and improbably, like something worth the arguments being made on its behalf. "You came to me," Thanos said. "Your ki is the strongest on this side of the solar system," Goku said. It made sense. That word, ki, life, energy, battle, power, the universe runs on it. The assessment he had been building from orbit, energy type unclassifiable, power output unmeasured, behavioral pattern consistent with a warrior culture rather than an ideological or institutional actor, was now supplemented by proximity. The being in front of him was not performing anything. There was no posture, no threat display, no attempt to establish terms before the contest. He was simply present and measuring, not yet committed to a response. "You know why I'm here," Thanos said. "You wanted to see what I was," Goku said. "I understand. I wanted to see what you were too." Thanos moved first, not as a probe. As a full statement, Titanian physiology and the gathered force of decades of combat behind a single strike. It was the kind of blow that had, bare-handed and without amplification, matched the full output of the Green Rage force and done so at a level that suggested he had not been working at capacity when he did it. Goku went Super Saiyan Blue. The aura expanded in a single controlled burst, blue and white-edged, God Ki combined with the Super Saiyan multiplier, hair shifting to the specific shade that meant he was operating in the form he had spent an era learning to sustain. He caught the punch with both hands and the shockwave from the collision rolled outward through the upper atmosphere in a pressure wave visible from the surface below as a brief, sourceless brightening. Not a sunrise, but a second light arriving from the wrong direction lasting 4 seconds. The Avengers on the ground watched through a feed. Stark had routed to every screen in the Triskelion. They watched 2 objects begin moving in the space above them. The exchange was too fast to resolve at this distance, but the energy output was not invisible. Tony's sensors, which had not returned a stable reading on the visitor since his arrival, were now producing 2 signatures simultaneously. One tagged as Thanos, one flagged as unknown, both competitive, neither dominant. It was the most even fight Goku had had in this universe. Not because Thanos was hitting harder than the SSJ-3 combination of the earlier engagement, because Thanos' output was controlled in a way the rage energy had not been. Every strike was calibrated, every exchange extracted information as well as force. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to understand, and the fight as a diagnostic instrument was something Goku recognized because he had been doing it for decades. The exchange lasted longer than Thanos had expected. Not because the Saiyan was beating him. This was parity, not a rout, because the force on the other side of each impact was not declining with time. It was incrementally increasing, barely measurably. But consistently, with each successive exchange, the Chi output meeting his was slightly more than it had been before. Thanos stopped. He raised one hand, palm outward. Goku stopped immediately, which was itself data. This was a fighter who understood signals, who could recognize a pause for what it was rather than treating it as an opening. They held position, two figures in orbital space. "You grow stronger during the fight," Thanos said. It was not a question. "Cyan," Goku said, as if that explained it. "The harder the fight, the more I push. That's just how we work." Thanos looked at him for a long moment. The assessment had reached a conclusion he had not fully anticipated when he left the gauntlet on the ship. The variable was not stable. It was not a fixed quantity that could be measured and addressed. It was a process, and the process accelerated under pressure, which meant that a protracted engagement was not in his interest. The calculation was clear. "Then this conversation is better held before you push any further." He gestured toward the planet, below the blue-lined atmosphere. "The cities, come down, we have things to discuss." Goku read the decision behind the gesture. The Mad Titan had voluntarily paused a fight he had entered with full capability and every reason to continue. That pause was information. It was, in fact, the most significant piece of information the entire exchange had produced. "Okay," Goku said. They descended. They came down together, and neither of them was in a hurry about it. The park had not finished being a park when they landed. The northern tree line was still standing. The southern quarter had been debris cleared by SHIELD units over the previous 2 days, and was now open ground. What remained at the center was a stretch of scorched grass and a few large rocks pushed in from the old fountain area, and the Avengers at a perimeter 60 meters out, watching. Fury had given one order, quietly, into 7 separate comms channels. "Do not engage." Not yet. Whatever was about to happen in that park was not something any unit he commanded was going to survive inserting itself into. Thanos sat on the largest rock. He folded his hands across his knees with the ease of someone who had arrived at his conclusions before the meeting and did not expect to revise them. Goku settled cross-legged into the grass 6 meters in front of him, the way he sat when he was watching something that needed watching carefully. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Goku waited. "I have watched this universe collapse under the weight of its own abundance," Thanos said. The voice was not raised. It never needed to be. Species consuming until there is nothing left. Civilizations ending not in fire, but in starvation. I offer them a mercy they cannot see in time to appreciate. Half of everything, chosen by chance, not by worth. Fair. And you decided that someone had to. Thanos looked at him the way someone looked at a question they had answered many times and did not tire of, because the answer was still true each time. Because I am strong enough to do it, and honest enough to do it without pretending it is anything other than what it is. Most beings with the power to make this choice would lie to themselves about what they are doing and why. I do not. Goku was quiet for a moment. "You know what I am," he said. "A Saiyan, where I come from. Saiyans were built to conquer, kill the weak, make room for the strong. They used exactly that. Math, they believed in it, the way you believe in yours. Then you understand. Frieza killed them all. No anger in it, a statement the way a statement sounded when it had long since finished being grief and was now simply true. He killed the whole species because they were useful when weak and dangerous when strong. That's where your math ends. The weak become strong. Every person you ever erased might have been the one who found the real answer. You don't get to do the math on that. Nobody does. On the perimeter, Steve Rogers had his arms crossed and was not moving. He had been waiting 3 days to hear this argument made by someone with the standing to make it. Thanos considered the response. He was genuinely considering it. This was not performance. You had no power when you were born. Now you are here. You believe that is proof. I believe the only honest thing you can do with strength is point it at the next ceiling and break through. Goku's voice was not raised either. Not at the people below you. Never at the people below you. Thanos stood. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the man in the grass below him. The calculation he had run on Goku since before arriving in this planet's orbit had been accurate about one thing, and wrong about one thing. Accurate. The power was real and increasing, and not governed by any restraint the Mad Titan recognized as rational. Wrong. This was not an ideological blank, a warrior with no position. It simply did not speak the language of position. A fine argument, he said, for a universe with unlimited resources and unlimited time. He tilted his head. This universe has neither. He opened his right hand. The gauntlet was there. Not all 6 stones glowing in their settings, but the gauntlet itself. Gold, enormous, shaped to a hand that had with the full configuration and a single motion erased half of all life in this universe. He had been carrying it the entire time. The choice not to reach for it during the orbital exchange had been deliberate, its own kind of evidence about his intentions. This choice was different. I am going to put the remaining stones in place, he said. Your world will live through it, or it will not. That is the point. And I'm afraid you will find that your philosophy has no application to what comes next. Goku looked at the gauntlet for a moment, then at Thanos. Then, I guess we finish the fight. His hair changed. Not gold, not blue. Tony Stark's sensors, which had returned their first stable readings on the visitor during the orbital exchange, were now receiving a figure that required 3 sequential readjustments to register, and then exceeded the adjusted scale and returned a new kind of error, not the absence of data, but the overflow of it. Silver-white. The hair settled silver-white, and the aura that spread from the figure at the park's center moved outward in a corona of silver and gold, and the air inside that corona had changed in a way that was difficult to assign a measurement to, the way deep water and surface water looked the same from above and were entirely different things. Goku's eyes were still. Not the stillness of someone holding power back, not the concentration that preceded action. The stillness of a body that no longer asked its mind for instructions before moving, that had solved the problem of the gap between thought and response by eliminating the gap. Thanos, uncharacteristically, took a step back. He raised the gauntlet. The Power Stone's light concentrated to a point, the same force that had erased half of all life in this universe with a full gauntlet gesture, focused now into a beam aimed at the figure. Goku was not where he aimed, not teleportation. There was no key transmission flash. The beam arrived and found an afterimage, and the afterimage settled into the grass below, and the grass did not even scorch. He had simply not been there when the beam arrived. The gap between where Thanos had aimed and where Goku was not was the only evidence the movement had happened at all. The palm strike came from the left. The sound was the first thing that reached the perimeter, not an impact exactly, but the sharp report of a force meeting resistance and winning quickly. Thanos went through the edge of the park tree line and through the wall of the parking structure, standing behind it, and into the building behind the structure, and the outer wall of that building, cracked from the point of contact outward in a pattern that spread as far as the load-bearing columns, because the strike had not been aimed at the building. Silence, then movement in the wreckage. Thanos stood. He pressed one hand against his side and looked at his palm. Blood. Not much. Titanian physiology did not bleed easily. It had not bled in an exchange with a mortal-scale combatant in longer than some of the civilizations this universe was currently protecting had existed. He looked at the figure in the silver aura standing 20 meters away, the gold and silver light still moving outward from the corona in the morning air. On the perimeter, no one spoke. Tony Stark had stopped looking at his sensors. Steve Rogers had his hand against his earpiece and was saying nothing into it. The feed going back to the Triskelion was live, and Nick Fury watched the man who had fallen through the sky above this city 4 days ago with no warning and no invitation, standing in a ruined park with silver and gold light moving from his aura, and did not say anything at all because there was nothing to add to what the image was already saying. Thanos had not bled in a very long time. Thanos closed the remaining stones into the gauntlet one at a time, not all at once. He had carried it here and chosen not to assemble it, and that choice had been its own kind of argument, and now the argument was over. The Power Stone went in first. The air around the park's center changed immediately, a thickening, a new gravity, as though the space within 10 meters of him was developing a density that the rest of the world had not agreed to. He was already physically capable of matching the full output of the green rage force with his bare hands. The Power Stone channeled through the gauntlet's setting changed that baseline in a direction that had no clean unit to measure it. The next exchange was harder. Goku was still in MUI, the silver-white aura still moved from his frame, the stillness in his eyes unbroken. The exchange that had put Thanos through a parking structure did not repeat. The strikes that landed met a resistance that had not been there before, and the ones that did not land required more of the awareness that MUI provided, more of the body's own read on where the next moment would be. He was still not losing, but the distance between him and losing had narrowed, and he was aware of it. Then the Space Stone. The geometry of the space around Goku's position. Not a portal, a compression, the local fabric of the dimension, bending inward and beginning to close around the volume he occupied, folding him toward somewhere that was not here. He felt it through his key sense before he felt it through his body, which gave him the fraction he needed. Thanos' key was outside the fold. He locked onto the signature and used instant transmission and was 6 meters to the left before the fold sealed. Thanos opened another one. Goku locked onto his Kai and moved again. The pattern repeated 4 times in the span of 8 seconds, each iteration requiring a new lock on a signature that was present but surrounded by geometry that was actively trying to make the lock meaningless. It was something that had no clean name in the language of combat, a contest between teleportation that worked by life energy and spatial control that worked by bending the rules under which life energy moved. Each escape cost something that did not replenish between iterations. He was beginning to feel the cost when Thanos raised his left hand and turned the time stone. The world went backward. Not all of it. The parking structure uncracked. The blood left Thanos' palm and returned to where it had been. The afterimage of Goku's position, which had been evidence of MUI's speed, assembled itself in reverse and slotted back into the moment before he had moved from it. The park unarranged itself back to 30 seconds ago, and Goku was standing in the place he had been standing then, and Thanos was standing unbelled in the place he had stood then, and the world had simply accepted this without protest. Goku's key sense registered the reversal, not as the world moving. As the world having moved and arrived back, the two states of reality pressing against each other at the seam of what the time stone had done, and his sense reading both and knowing the difference, he looked at the gauntlet, looked at his own hands, looked at the parking structure standing intact behind Thanos. "That's not a fight," he said. "No," Thanos said, "it is not." Goku pushed deeper. The silver aura had not dropped. What came now was not a different form. It was the same form at a different depth, the way a river in flood was still a river and not something else. The people in this city. The soldier at the perimeter who had carried a position for 3 days waiting for someone to make the argument properly. The man in the red armor who could not classify what he was seeing and had not stopped trying. The small one who had stepped between a tranquilizer dart and a reaction that could have ended badly 4 days ago, and had said, "Nobody does that again," and meant it. The man in the cabin who had felt something fighting on his planet, and answered it even though it cost him the peace he had spent years building. Not a weapon made from them, not fuel, just the fact of them carried through the ultra instinct instead of set aside by it. And the aura that resulted was not the controlled silver white of the earlier form. It was larger. The gold at its edges was brighter. It pressed outward far enough that the grass at the perimeter edge flattened in the direction away from the park's center. Thanos fired the Power Stone again. Not a focused beam this time. The erasure energy spread wide, the kind of field that had reduced half of all life in this universe to nothing with a fraction of this output. It hit the aura and partially slid. The key density at the aura's edge was sufficient that the field could not simply remove the thing at its center. The force was real and the resistance was real, and neither was canceling the other. It was like trying to erase a sun with a match. Thanos pressed the field. For 17 seconds the sound changed, a sustained tone in the frequencies between thunder and structural stress, registering in the materials of the buildings at the perimeter. Then Goku looked down. Below the sustained tone, below the pressed field and the aura holding against it, there were people in the streets outside the park's perimeter. They had not evacuated. Some of them were filming. Most of them were simply watching, the way people watched things they knew they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe, and they were not particularly frightened, or rather, they were frightened and had decided to stay anyway, which was a different thing and, in Goku's understanding, a better one. The Space Stone had bent a water tower 2 blocks east. The water had run to the intersection, and a child was standing at its edge, watching the park the way the adults were. The timestone reversal had left the air in the quarter-mile radius feeling wrong. A looseness no one could name, but everyone could feel. Goku dropped Ultra Instinct, the aura contracted, and went out. He was standing in the park in his orange training clothes, breathing hard in a way he had not been breathing hard earlier in this fight, and he had not stopped the gauntlet, and he could keep fighting, and he would not win. "If you keep using those stones," he said, "those people die." Thanos looked at the street beyond the perimeter. "Yes, and you don't care. The math accepts some inputs more than others." He said it without emphasis. "As a fact." "That is the nature of the math." Goku looked at him for a moment. Then he turned around. He walked to the edge of the park, nearest the populated zone, and stopped there. Not attacking, not performing. Standing in the space between the gauntlet and the street, the way he had stood in spaces like this before in his own universe. Not because the architecture of responsibility demanded it, not because he had done the calculation about what the powerful owed the powerless. Because the people behind him were real, and he was real, and the space between them was where he had decided to be, and that was the whole of the reasoning. "Then try to get past me," he said. Thanos considered this. He had the Mind Stone, and Goku's mind was not shielded. He had the Reality Stone. He had, in the gauntlet on his hand, enough to move one person from between him and a goal he had pursued for longer than most species had existed. He did not raise it. The warrior standing between him and the street did not fit the calculation. Not heroism in the sense this universe had built its institutions around. No debt, no responsibility, no architecture of obligation. Power refusing to impose anything except its own presence. He had a philosophy for everything in this universe. He had faced gods and sorcerers and armies and machines and the varied and committed resistance of people who believed that power was a weight they carried on behalf of everyone who couldn't carry it themselves. He had an answer for all of it. He did not have an answer for this. "This is not over," he said. "I know," Goku said. "Good." The gauntlet powered down, Thanos turned, and the space behind him opened, and he was gone. The perimeter held its position for 4 more seconds. Then Fury's voice came through the comms. "Stand down." The feeds came back. The air in the quarter-mile radius began slowly to feel permanent again. Goku stood at the park's edge and looked at the street. The child was still there at the edge of the water tower's runoff. He raised a hand. The child, after a moment's consideration, raised one back. It was, Tony Stark would say later, to no one in particular, the most honest answer he could have given him. And Thanos had no idea what to do with it. For now, that was enough. The damage report took 40 minutes. Tony Stark delivered it with the flat affect of someone who had learned, over years of post-incident briefings, that numbers went down easier when presented without inflection. Infrastructure damage in the park and the surrounding blocks, significant, concentrated, already sectioned by SHIE units, maintaining the only kind of perimeter that had proved effective in the past 5 days, which was to say, a perimeter nobody was being asked to hold against the thing inside it. The parking structure behind the park needed structural review. The building behind the parking structure had hairline fractures in its outer wall from the point of contact outward, and the load-bearing columns had held, and the engineers were going to spend 2 weeks arguing about why they had held before arriving at the honest answer, which was that the strike had been precise. No civilian fatalities. That number sat in the room with a weight its own for a moment. The alien in orange training clothes had spent a gauntlet engagement with an opponent who was genuinely trying to win, actively managing the civilian exposure zone. That was not in any brief Fury had put together before the week started. He had not planned for it because he could not have planned for it, and planning around it now was going to require a category that did not yet exist. "We have no containment option," Fury said. "No legal category. No treaty that governs the situation." He looked at Strange. "Tell them what you told me, Doctor." Strange looked at the table and then at the room. Kai is not classifiable under the Accords or the Registration Act or the Mystic Arts jurisdictional framework because it originates outside this universe. There is no instrument I am aware of, legal, mystical, institutional, or otherwise, that currently applies to this person. He is, for any practical purpose, ungovernable by existing means. The room absorbed this. "So what do we do?" Steve Rogers said. Fury looked at him. "Same thing we did when Thor showed up. We figure it out." That was the end of the meeting. Nobody argued because nobody had anything better. Goku was sitting cross-legged in a field 2 miles north of the park when Tony Stark's sensors located him. He had been there for an hour, eyes closed, Kai sense running at the low, continuous hum that was its resting state. cataloguing the city's life signatures the way it had been cataloguing them since he arrived, and would continue cataloguing them whether or not he was paying direct attention to any of them. His injuries from the gauntlet exchange were visible in the sensor readout as reduced thermal output in several areas of his frame, the cost of the Power Stone field, the Space Stone iterations, the hours of engagement before the stalemate resolved. They were already closing. That part was not new. The new part was the second reading, taken 6 minutes after the first. The output was higher, not dramatically. 3 to 4%, concentrated in his key baseline rather than in any specific application. Tony ran the comparison against the pre-fight reading he had taken during the orbital exchange, which was the first stable reading his sensors had produced on the visitor at all, and the numbers held. The second scan after the injury was measurably stronger than the first scan before it. He sent the file to the team with one line. He just leveled up. No one responded. The number did not require a response. It required sitting with, which was a different thing, and everyone in receipt of it was doing that in their own way. Steve Rogers left the Triskelion without his shield. He walked out to the field by himself. Not a mission. Not a debrief. Goku heard him coming 200 meters before he arrived. Chi sense. The specific signature of this one, resolute and tired in a way that was not physical, and had not been physical in Steve's experience for a long time, carrying the weight of the week, and of the longer thing the week was part of. He opened his eyes when Steve reached the edge of the grass. "Where would you go?" Steve said. No preamble, just the question. The way he asked questions he had been sitting with. "I don't know." Goku thought about it honestly. "I'd have to find a Kai signature strong enough to lock onto from this universe, something powerful enough to reach across dimensional boundaries. Get back to mine." A pause. "I don't know if I want to. Not yet." Steve sat down in the grass. "Why?" "Because Thanos didn't die, and I haven't beaten the Hulk properly." He said it seriously, as if this were a practical consideration and not a remarkable thing to say after the week that had just happened. "And you still have people here I haven't met yet, who are probably strong." The quieter beat came a moment later, almost an afterthought. "And there's something else here. I don't know what it is. Something else. I felt it during the fight, when I was using everything." His key sense. At MUI's outermost extension had reached far enough to brush the edge of the solar system, and in that reach, it had found something it had not found at lower levels of attention. Not Thanos, his signature was cold and deliberate and recognizable. Something else. Something with a mass of presence that did not move. The way things did not move when they were older than movement as a concept, and had been where they were long enough that the galaxy had shaped itself around them. He had been carrying the knowledge of that signature, quietly, since the fight ended. The way a fighter noted something in a tree line and filed it for the right time. He did not say its name. He did not have its name. Steve Rogers looked out across the field. The city was at the horizon, still managing its own damage, still making the sounds of a city that had taken a difficult week and intended to keep being a city. "Are you going to carry it?" he said. "The weight of this world." Goku thought about this with the same quality of honest attention he gave everything worth thinking about. "I don't think I carry things that way. I don't think I know how." A pause. "But if something comes for those people, the ones that can't fight back, I'll be between it and them. That much I know how to do." Steve looked at him for a long time. Not satisfied, not unsatisfied. The expression he had when the argument had been heard fully and resolved into a shape that was true, and also incomplete, which was how many things resolved that were worth taking seriously. "It's not the same thing." "No," Goku agreed. It's not. They sat without speaking for a while. The afternoon came through the field from the east, and neither of them said anything into it, and that was in its own way a kind of respect for the distance between two positions that were both honestly held. Thor found him that evening on the rooftop, the same rooftop in Midtown, where 5 days ago a man in orange had fallen through a dimensional wound in the sky and landed here and watched a pigeon and waved at a military helicopter and been entirely and genuinely untroubled by any of it. The assessment zone was still active 2 blocks south. The city, at this altitude, was quiet, in the way it was quiet above a certain floor. The sound present but compressed, the density of the place present without its specific urgency. Goku was sitting at the rooftop's edge with his legs folded, looking at the stars appearing in the eastern sky as the light went. Thor sat beside him without ceremony. They did not say anything for several minutes. 2 warriors from different cosmologies, at the end of a week neither of them had been prepared for. Though for Thor the word prepared carried a different history than it did for most. "The one you sensed," Thor said. "At the edge of the solar system, you felt it too, not felt." He was looking at the sky in a specific way, not the way a person looked at something familiar and comfortable, but the way a person looked at something they knew very well and did not look at carelessly. "I know the name. We have a word for what it does to a planet." He did not say the name. He did not need to. Goku nodded slowly, his eyes on the stars. "Good fight," he said. Thor looked at him. "You think everything is a good fight?" "No," Goku said. "Some of them are great." Thor looked at him for a long time after that and said nothing. And that was its own kind of answer, the kind that came from a god who had been alive long enough to know which silences were wisdom and which were fear, and to know the difference between the two was sometimes only where you were standing when you heard them. In the deep between galaxies, where the distance between objects was measured in units that had no human analog, the Silver Surfer slowed his board. He had been traveling at a pace that covered a significant fraction of the observable universe's width in the time it took a star to complete a rotation, and he had slowed because his instruments, which were extensions of the power cosmic, rather than mechanical things, had registered something that warranted the interruption of whatever else he was doing. He had been cataloguing it since the anomaly's first emergence. A life energy signature from a world at the edge of a quiet arm of the Milky Way. Not gamma radiation, which he knew by its specific decay. Not a mutant X gene expression, which registered as a particular kind of evolutionary escalation. Not magic in any of the forms the power cosmic could recognize and name. Not divine in the sense any known pantheon produced. Not the power cosmic itself. Something from somewhere else carrying the quality of elsewhere, the way an object carries the smell of the place it came from. The being was mobile. The power was real. The measurement his instruments produced at full sensitivity was significant enough that he paused over it for what passed, in his experience of time, as a moment. Then he directed his report to the only recipient it required and continued on his way. What answered his report was not a voice. It was a shift in something that did not have a name in any language that had evolved on a planetary surface, because languages evolved on planetary surfaces did not require a word for the quality of awareness that Galactus brought to the things he noticed. He was ancient in a way that made the word ancient imprecise. He had existed before the current universe. He would exist after it. He had devoured worlds enough in number that the civilizations destroyed across that history exceeded every civilization that currently existed in this galaxy by a factor with too many digits to render conveniently. He had done this not out of malice and not out of ideology, and not because he had ever once decided that it needed to be done. He had done it because hunger was his nature, the same way that gravity was the nature of mass. Not chosen, not enjoyed, not regretted present. He received the Silver Surfer's report. He noted the signature. It was unusual. He did not act on unusual things when he was not hungry, and he was not at this particular moment hungry. He noted it, and for now moved on. He would act when he was hungry. He was not at this particular moment, elsewhere, in a space between realities that could not be located on any map, because location required a universe to locate within, and the living tribunal did not require one. The function that was its purpose executed without ceremony. It was the multiversal's judge. It had no personality in any sense a biological being would recognize, and no agenda in any sense a political being would recognize. It had a function, and the function was this: to measure all things against the balance that its nature required to exist. When that balance was threatened, it intervened. When it was not threatened, a new power signature in one of the universes it oversaw, significant by the standards of that universe. Planetary scale, potentially stellar, under the right conditions, the signature belonged to something that was not abstract. It embodied no concept. It was not the living incarnation of an idea. It was not a force in the cosmological sense. It was simply a very strong person from somewhere else who was currently sitting on a rooftop in one of the denser population centers of one of the planets it oversaw. The living tribunal weighed this. Not yet a matter for intervention. The scale continued to balance. The moment continued. The universe that contained the rooftop and the person on it continued to be a universe. On the rooftop, Goku was looking at the stars, the same rooftop in Midtown Manhattan where 5 days ago he had fallen through a wound in the sky and landed and found a pigeon and a helicopter and a city that had no idea what it had let in. The assessment zone, 2 blocks south, was still active, the lights of the survey units moving in the dark below. He was sitting with his legs folded, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes moving across the eastern sky as it deepened, running his Kai sense outward the way a person might run their hand across a familiar surface, not looking for anything specific, mapping what was there. The lightning god to the north, massive, old, divine, in the way that had nothing to do with a title, the specific quality of a being who had existed so long that power had become structural, far upstate. The rage presence that had quieted back into the physicist underneath it, the enormous thing folded into the smaller thing, manageable again and fragile in its manageability. Somewhere in the cold water, far below the Atlantic, a deliberate and patient intelligence recalculating, the way something recalculated when the variable it had gone to assess had refused to behave like a variable. And at the edge of the solar system, enormous and still and ancient, the presence he had first felt when the MUI fight had pushed his sense to its outermost reach. He was not afraid of any of it. He had read worse across his own universe and found it interesting. He was not unaware of any of it either. All of it was filed, all of it was real, and all of it was, in its own way, an invitation. This universe, he thought, has good fights in it. He had found 4 in the first 5 days. He was going to be here for a while. The universe of this story holds its shape for now. A man in orange training clothes on a Manhattan rooftop, watching the stars and filing their signatures, a sleeping rage in a cabin far upstate, the physicist reading by lamplight, the piece rebuilt from pieces, a purple tyrant somewhere in deep space, patient and certain of his math and working. For the first time in memory, on a new variable, he cannot reduce. A silver figure moving between galaxies, the power cosmic trailing behind him like light, carrying a report that has been received and noted, and for now, filed. And at the edge of the solar system, something ancient and vast, and driven by nothing as simple as malice, waiting with the patience of things that have outlasted every other thing they have ever waited for. And at the boundary of what this universe is, the shape of what comes next, assembling itself, without hurry, without announcement, without any knowledge of the man in orange who will, when the time comes, be the one standing between it and the people behind him. For now, the city moves. For now, the stars are where he filed them. For now, this is enough, and the for now is doing a great deal of work, because the things assembling themselves at the boundary do not know that word, and the man watching the stars does not use it the way everyone else does. He uses it the way a fighter does, as in, this ceiling, for now, as in, I am not done. All right. You just watched Goku go Ultra Instinct in the middle of the Marvel Universe, hold a Power Stone erasure field to a standstill, and make the Mad Titan rethink his entire calculation. That's what happens when a universe built on responsibility runs into a man who has never heard of it. Drop where you're watching this from in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this was your kind of what if, hit like and subscribe so you're there for the